The cops thought they could afford anything to make fun of the humiliation. But when one of them lifted up the black woman's skirt, everything changed in seconds. They had no idea who was standing in front of them, and they were certainly not prepared for what happened next. Please hit subscribe if you believe in justice, and comment if you have ever seen injustice happen right before your eyes. The streets of Savannah, Georgia had a way of humming at night. Not loudly, not in a way that startled or disrupted, but in a subtle, unbroken rhythm. Like a whisper between old trees, a soft reminder that life, even in its quietest moments, never truly sleeps. Porch lights flickered dimly through lace curtains. The air carried the scent of magnolia and exhaust, and the faint rustle of Spanish moss in the breeze painted everything with an old-world stillness. Into that southern hush walked Sarah Matthews, tall, brown-skinned, her long frame relaxed but grounded, her steps measured and calm. She wasn't in a hurry. She never was. Not anymore. She had just finished teaching her Thursday night self-defense class at the local community center on Waters Avenue. It wasn't a formal job, more of a calling. The women who came weren't there to become fighters. They came for something deeper: protection, confidence, a way to reclaim something they'd lost in silence. Some were young and full of fear. Others, older, with the hardened look of survival behind their eyes. Sarah gave them what she could, a place to feel strong again. After all, she had been strong once too. Strong enough to earn a name on national TV, to hear her name in sports broadcasts and gymnasiums. But that was a long time ago. Back then, she was that girl on ESPN, the taekwondo champion who carried herself like stone but moved like wind. Sponsors came calling, so did photographers, TV producers, brand managers. Then came the knee, one bad landing in a televised match in Dallas, and everything unraveled like the thread in a cheap sleeve. They loved her until she limped. Then they called her difficult. Then they stopped calling. She had no desire to win them back. Now her world was smaller and infinitely more peaceful. She lived in a second-floor apartment over a used bookstore on East Broad. Her routine was simple: classes, coffee, and the long, silent walks she came to crave. That night she wore a cotton black dress that fell just below her knees, and white sneakers worn from use. The bag across her shoulder was heavy with pads and training gear, and as always, she walked alone. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, but it was hers. She knew the cracks in the sidewalk, the slant of the trees, the leaning mailbox at the corner of Habersham like a friend who'd had one too many. She'd just passed the corner store with the flickering neon open sign, though it hadn't been open past 9 p.m. in years, when she felt it. That subtle shift in the atmosphere, not quite fear, but a change in the fabric of the night, as if the air had taken a long inhale. She kept walking, didn't turn, didn't need to. The slow roll of tires behind her, deliberate and smooth, told her what was there. Police cruiser, no lights, no siren, just presence. She let her steps continue as if nothing had changed, but her muscles, trained by years of combat and instinct, had already taken inventory of every shadow, every possible exit. The car came closer. She heard the low murmur of voices inside, then a chuckle, soft, slurred, laced with a kind of confidence born not from kindness, but power. "Well, well," came a voice from the open window, laced with southern charm, twisted into condescension. "Ain't you a sight to see tonight?" Another voice, deeper and less amused, added, "Ain't it past your curfew, sweetheart?" Sarah didn't respond. Not because she was afraid, but because she had learned long ago that some responses don't require sound. They require stillness. Behind her, the cruiser didn't move past. It slowed further, almost idling. She turned the corner onto Drayton, as she always did. So did they. Another comment followed, louder now. "What's a thick, brown girl like you doing walking all alone out here? Looking for trouble?" Still, she said nothing. A pause. Then the passenger door opened. One of the officers stepped out, walking with a swagger that belonged more in a high school hallway than a city street. Young, clean-shaven, close-cut hair, maybe mid-20s. He approached her side with a kind of mock politeness. "Wait a second," he said, eyes scanning her up and down like she was inventory. "Aren't you that karate chick from TV? Damn, didn't think you'd be this real up close." He smirked. Sarah continued walking, but now she could see his shadow beside hers, matching her pace. "You used to kick people in the face for a living, huh?" he said. "Guess now you're just kicking it in the hood like the rest of your people." He laughed at his own joke. The car behind them crept forward just slow enough to stay in sync. From inside, another officer called out, "Careful, Jake. She might actually dropkick your dumb ass." Laughter. Sarah adjusted her grip on the strap of her bag. Not from tension, just recalibration. Jake, or whatever his name was, stepped a little closer. "You know," he said, voice dropping, "a girl wearing a dress like that, well, some folks might get ideas." Then, without warning, he reached down and flicked the back of her dress upward, not a grab, not aggressive, just a motion, just enough to shame, enough to claim. The laughter behind her cracked through the still night like glass under boot. One of them honked the horn. Twice. Sarah stopped walking. She didn't turn. Not yet. Not immediately. For a single breath, she stood there. Frozen, not by fear, but by focus. She had known many moments in her life. Triumph, failure, silence, noise. But this was different. This wasn't a match she had trained for. This was something worse. Then she turned. Her body shifted like a tide. Slow, controlled. Her eyes locked onto his. The boy, Jake, froze mid-smirk. Something in her gaze unspooled him. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured. "You think this is funny?" she asked. He faltered, then tried to regain ground. "Relax. It was a joke." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You don't get to joke about me, not tonight." He raised a hand, unsure now. "We were just messing around." Her hand moved, a blur. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back, pulled him forward until he bent at the waist with a grunt. He didn't even have time to resist. The second cop bolted from the car. Sarah moved instinctively, spinning, using the momentum to drive her elbow into his side. A clean hit, just under the ribcage, right where body armor ends. He stumbled. The third stayed in the driver's seat, hand hovering near his gun. But he didn't draw. He was still. Watching. Thinking. Sarah stood there, breath steady, chest rising and falling like the waves off Tybee Beach. She looked at them all, their uniforms, their weapons, their confusion, and said nothing. She didn't need to. She turned and walked away. And no one stopped her. Sarah's footsteps echoed down the quiet block, the rhythm of her sneakers against the sidewalk now slower, almost meditative. She didn't rush. She never did. The adrenaline had faded, but her breath remained steady. Her pulse was calm. Behind her, the cruiser hadn't moved. She could still feel their presence, not as a threat anymore, but as confusion, as silence, as an unanswered question hanging in the thick Georgia air. She turned the corner at East Broad and disappeared into the shadows cast by a flickering street lamp. Her building was 3 blocks away, and she walked those final minutes as if she hadn't just disarmed 2 uniformed officers and stared down a third, without saying more than a few words. In the morning, the sun spilled through her blinds with no hint of what had happened the night before. Her small apartment smelled of strong coffee and sandalwood. She moved through her routine with deliberate ease, stretching, showering, checking on her peace lilies by the kitchen window. Her phone buzzed with nothing urgent: a community newsletter, a weather alert, and a reminder that her grocery order was ready for pickup. Nothing about the incident. Nothing about the cruiser. Just silence. But silence had a sound if you knew how to listen. A few blocks away, inside Savannah Precinct 3, the tension was starting to grow roots. At first, it was subtle. The officer who had stayed behind in the cruiser, Tom Delaney, 27, still relatively new to the force, arrived at the station with dark circles under his eyes and a jaw set too tightly. He didn't join the usual morning chatter. He didn't linger near the coffee machine. He avoided eye contact. Across the room, Officer Jake Whitman, the one who had flicked the back of Sarah's dress, was quieter than usual, tapping his fingers against the desk in a staccato rhythm. He hadn't laughed at any of the usual jokes. He hadn't mentioned what happened, not directly, but the mood had shifted. And in a precinct, mood spreads faster than information. Sergeant Karen Lowe, a 22-year veteran who ran the admin staff, noticed it before anyone said a word. She'd seen this kind of silence before, not from guilt, but from ego dented by something it couldn't fully understand. When men like Jake stopped boasting and started blinking too much, she knew something was wrong. Around mid-morning, she walked past the break room and overheard a whisper, low and sharp. She didn't even say anything. There was the scrape of a chair, followed by footsteps that stopped when they noticed her presence. She kept walking, but she remembered. By noon, the unease was no longer confined to whispers. One of the dispatchers mentioned overhearing a strange call log that had no matching entry in the system. An IT technician flagged a missing body cam segment from Jake's shift, a deletion that didn't follow standard protocol. And then there was the internal feedback system, an anonymous message delivered to the inbox of Internal Affairs Junior Investigator Daniel Reyes, with one line, "Watch Patrol Unit 14B. Something happened last night." Daniel almost dismissed it. Most of these anonymous notes were pranks or internal politics, but something in the tone, quiet, certain, without embellishment, felt different. He pulled the patrol logs. The unit had no incident reports filed for a 2-hour window between 10:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. No citations, no traffic stops, no suspicious activity logs. Just GPS movement through residential streets. One route traced past the elementary school near East Broad. Too late for a school zone patrol. Too quiet for a call. Daniel flagged it and noted the officers assigned to the cruiser: Officer Jake Whitman, Officer Marcus Fields, and Officer Tom Delaney. Then he sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. By that evening, the first ripple had become a current. Sergeant Lowe passed Officer Delaney in the parking lot, pacing between 2 rows of patrol cars, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and anxious. She caught fragments. "She grabbed me. No, not like that. I don't know what she's gonna do." She didn't intervene. But she made another mental note. Then, like a match dropped in dry brush, the rumor spread. A training officer from a neighboring shift mentioned hearing something about a civilian takedown. Someone said a woman had flipped 2 cops and walked off. Another mentioned Sarah's name. No one knew how they knew her, but someone remembered seeing her on a billboard for a sports clinic years ago. Her face, brown, fierce, proud, wasn't easily forgotten. By the following morning, the whispers became impossible to ignore. Captain Charles Brantley, head of Precinct 3, known more for his gruff tone and outdated mustache than for nuance, called the 3 officers into his office without ceremony. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He watched them as they sat. Delaney jittery, Whitman defensive, Fields strangely silent. "Something happened on patrol night before last?" he asked. No one answered. Not immediately. Delaney looked at the floor. Fields looked at the wall. It was Whitman who finally muttered, "It was nothing." Brantley didn't blink. Nothing, he repeated, then leaned back in his chair. Then I'm guessing you won't mind if IA takes a look at your footage. That broke them. Delaney spoke first. I think we made a mistake, he said, voice cracking. The other two turned toward him, eyes wide, but he didn't stop. He told the truth. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. That they followed a woman. That they joked. That they said things they shouldn't have. That someone touched her dress. That she didn't respond the way they expected. That she walked away. And that afterward, something shifted in the air that hadn't settled since. Brantley didn't say anything. He just picked up the phone and called upstairs. By 4 p.m., Internal Affairs had opened an official review. The cruiser was impounded. Body cam backups were retrieved. Officer Delaney was placed on administrative leave. Officers Fields and Whitman followed the next day. An internal memo with the phrase, possible misconduct involving civilian contact, made the rounds. No names. No press. But the story had already escaped the building. Sarah didn't know any of this, not officially, but she felt it in the way people looked at her the next time she walked into the coffee shop on Victory Drive. The man behind the counter, who usually joked with her, was quiet. The regular who always offered to carry her tea tray looked nervous when she declined. She wasn't a symbol, she wasn't a victim. She was just a woman who had chosen not to shrink, and the city didn't know what to do with that. Back in the precinct, the atmosphere was brittle. Officers spoke in clipped tones, conversations halted when certain names were mentioned. Even those who hadn't been involved felt the tension. It wasn't about what had happened anymore. It was about what it revealed, about how quickly the story spread. About how 3 armed men with badges had been rendered powerless by a single woman who didn't raise her voice. Delaney, now sitting alone in a dim internal affairs interview room, told his full version. He admitted the jokes, the laughter, the flick of the dress, the expectation of fear. And then he described what actually happened. The silence, the look in her eyes, the precise, unflinching movement. The way she'd taken control without shouting, without threats, just presence. She wasn't scared of us, he said finally, his voice barely audible. We were scared of her. The IA investigator across from him stopped writing for a moment. You think she should have been scared? Delaney paused, then shook his head. I think we should have been. By the end of the week, the city had started whispering too. The headline appeared quietly. No screaming fonts, no dramatic photos, just a small article on the bottom half of the local newspaper's Metro section. 3 officers on leave, pending internal review of civilian incident. There were no names, no details, just the basic summary. A potential violation during a routine patrol. But by the time the story made its way to social media, the dots had already been connected. People remembered. Savannah wasn't New York or LA. Stories had a way of slipping through back doors and into diners and barbershops faster than any reporter could write them. By the second day, someone had posted an old clip of Sarah from her competition days, breaking boards on ESPN in a crisp white dobok, sweat dripping from her brow, her name chanted by a crowd. Comments flooded in beneath the video. Is this her? Wait, they tried that with her? She still lives here? Sarah saw none of it firsthand. She stayed offline, as she always did. Her phone buzzed with calls she didn't answer, from old contacts, former teammates, a reporter in Atlanta who left 3 voicemails back to back. Instead, she focused on her morning rituals. She walked her route. She returned to the community center. She taught her Thursday class. And she waited. Not for justice. Not for headlines. She waited because she knew that when power is challenged, it rarely retreats quietly. It waits for the right moment to bite back. On Monday, the cruiser appeared again, this time parked across from her building. Different unit, different faces. But the message was the same. They were watching. Not to intimidate. Not yet. They were assessing. Trying to gauge what she would do next. Whether she would go public. Whether she would push this further. She didn't acknowledge them. Just sipped her coffee on the sidewalk bench outside her building, eyes behind sunglasses, unreadable. But she felt them. Watching. Guessing. Whispering among themselves. Inside the precinct, no one said her name out loud anymore. The 3 officers were still on leave. Delaney had stopped coming in altogether, reportedly citing stress and seeking mental health days. Whitman had retained legal counsel. Fields refused all further interviews. Every officer in the building knew about the review, but no one wanted to be attached to it. Meetings became shorter, hallways quieter. Every glance lingered just a beat longer than before. Even the ones who had nothing to do with that night had started choosing their words more carefully. The air was thick, not with fear, but with recognition that the illusion of invincibility had cracked. Captain Brantley, who once ruled the floor with easy sarcasm and the confidence of a man who believed in his own immunity, now kept his office door closed more often than not. The pressure had shifted. The questions coming from above weren't just about the incident. They were about the culture, about precedent, about what else had gone unchecked. He knew what it meant. One misstep now, and it wouldn't just be 3 officers. It could be the entire command chain. So he scheduled sensitivity training, mandated new reporting protocols, issued internal memos about accountability culture. But everyone knew it wasn't about change, it was about optics. Meanwhile, Sarah continued as if nothing had happened. She didn't show up on the news, she didn't press charges, she didn't sue. That silence unnerved them more than any legal filing could. She had spoken not with her mouth, but with her body, with the way she'd stood firm, walked away, and made them feel like children playing with power they didn't understand. One afternoon, as she left the cafe on Victory, a man approached her cautiously. Mid-40s, uniformed but off-duty, his posture hesitant. "Ms. Matthews?" he asked. She turned slowly, met his gaze. "I work at the precinct," he said. I wanted to say some folks are talking." She waited. He swallowed hard. "They're not scared of getting caught," he continued. "They're scared because they don't know what you'll do next." She looked at him, really looked, and after a long pause, gave a small nod. "That makes 2 of us," she said. He nodded back and walked away. The investigation, now under external review, picked up pace. Surveillance footage from a nearby dry cleaner confirmed parts of Sarah's account. The missing body cam segment had been quietly recovered from a server backup. The report from Internal Affairs described behavioral misconduct, unauthorized contact, and verbal escalation with racial overtones. One line in particular stood out. The civilian did not provoke. The officers escalated. That sentence made its way into another memo, and then into a broader report passed to city officials. A name that had once been synonymous with medals and martial arts was now appearing in boardrooms and budget meetings. Quietly, reluctantly, unavoidably. Sarah kept walking her route. She passed the mural of Rosa Parks, now retouched once again after another act of vandalism. She paused briefly, then kept going. People recognized her more now. Some nodded. Some looked away. A few women approached her in grocery aisles or on the sidewalk to say, "Thank you." Not for fighting, but for not backing down. "My daughter's learning self-defense now because of you," one said. "Not because she wants to fight. Because she wants to know what it feels like to hold space for herself." Sarah just smiled, nodded, and moved on. Weeks passed. One officer was formally suspended. Another resigned before hearings began. Delaney, in a moment that surprised even his attorney, volunteered for a second interview. "I don't want to be the guy that lets this slide," he said. "What we did, that wasn't just stupid. It was part of something bigger, and she stopped it." Internal affairs marked his cooperation as extraordinary, though the court of public opinion had already decided on a deeper verdict. The silence had been broken. And once it breaks, it doesn't heal back the same. Sarah never issued a public statement. She turned down the interview requests, ignored the email offers for her side of the story, because the truth wasn't something she needed to explain. It had already been witnessed. In the way she stood, in the way she refused to flinch, in the way an entire department floundered under the weight of a moment it couldn't define or dismiss. One morning, as fall settled over the city and the streets turned brittle with wind, she walked the same route she had walked that night. Past the closed elementary school, past the crooked fence, past the place where her dress had been flicked up by a stranger who wore a badge. The sidewalk had been patched since then, the streetlight replaced. A camera now hung on the corner utility pole. City initiative, they said. But the space still held something. Not fear, not shame, just memory. She paused for a second, looked around, no one there, no one watching. She adjusted the strap on her bag and continued walking, her footsteps steady, her shadow stretching long in the early light. They had tried to reduce her to a moment, but she had become a mirror. And everyone, officers, officials, bystanders, had been forced to look. And for once, they couldn't look away. If they had known who she really was, they would have lowered their guns. But by the time they found out, it was already too late. The two-lane highway that curved gently through the outskirts of Augusta, Georgia, was mostly quiet at 11:45 p.m. A cool breeze blew in from the south, rustling the leaves as the streetlights cast broken shadows across the asphalt. A black luxury SUV glided silently under their dim glow. Inside sat Angela Carter, 48, her fingers resting calmly on the steering wheel. The soft light from the dashboard painted her face in gentle gold and green hues. She wasn't rushing. She never did. Angela had just concluded a week of intense negotiations in Washington, D.C., serving as a senior trade advisor for the Department of Commerce. Her focus had been on the proposed reciprocal tariffs outlined by President Donald Trump, which aimed to impose equivalent tariffs on countries that taxed American goods unfairly. These policies were set to impact international trade dynamics significantly. The proposed changes had sparked heated debates on Capitol Hill, with commerce officials, including Angela, working tirelessly to address concerns from both sides of the aisle. The administration aimed to implement tariffs that would match those imposed by other nations, ensuring a level playing field for American businesses. Angela was calm, focused. She hadn't missed a signal. She wasn't speeding. Her license was up to date, insurance too. Everything was by the book. But deep down, she knew. In this country, being a black woman driving a nice car at night sometimes meant the book didn't matter. Her rearview mirror lit up with flashing red and blue. Angela's foot eased off the gas. She turned on her blinker, moved carefully to the shoulder of the road, and exhaled. Her hands remained on the wheel, her breathing even. She'd done nothing wrong. But that had never been enough. Not always. A patrol car pulled in behind her. Two white officers stepped out, their silhouettes sharp under the strobing lights. One was short and wide-shouldered, his crew cut stark under the beam. The other was tall, angular, with a narrowed gaze that flickered with suspicion. Angela watched them through the side mirror as they approached. She didn't reach for anything. She simply rolled the window halfway and waited. The short one knocked hard on the glass with his flashlight. "License and registration," he barked. Angela offered a polite, level tone. "May I ask what I was pulled over for, officer?" "You didn't signal during a lane change," he replied, voice clipped. That was a lie. She had. But Angela had no interest in arguing. She moved slowly, deliberately opening the glove box, retrieving her documents. Her motions were rehearsed. Every black parent in America had taught their children how to do this. She handed them over. The officer grabbed them without looking. "Step out of the vehicle." Angela blinked. "Excuse me?" "Out. Now." The taller officer, Brendan Cole, she would later learn, stepped to the passenger side and leaned in, scanning the interior like he was hunting for something illegal. "This your car?" he asked with a sneer. "Yes, it is." He chuckled. "Paid for it with food stamps, huh?" Angela's jaw tensed slightly. She didn't take the bait. She'd heard worse from men who held higher ranks. "Step out." The shorter cop ordered again, now resting a hand on his firearm. Angela unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped onto the shoulder. The pavement was cold beneath her shoes, the air damp with southern spring. The highway was still. No other cars, no witnesses. "Hands on your head." Angela obeyed. "Now, down on your knees." She stared at the man. "I'm not resisting, officer. But why am I being—" The metallic click of a gun echoed in the stillness. He had drawn it, pointed it straight at her head. Angela had commanded teams in high-stakes negotiations. She had been in rooms where decisions impacted entire industries. But nothing felt as insulting as this. To be seen not as a citizen, not as a woman, not even as a person, but as a threat. She went to her knees, not out of fear, but because she knew they were waiting for a reason, any excuse to fire. The tall one circled her like a predator. "What's in the car? You hiding something? Guns? Drugs?" "No, sir." They opened her car door and began pulling things out. Her laptop bag, her documents, her Commerce Department badge still tucked inside her leather case. One officer tossed her folders onto the floor. Another grabbed her phone, scrolled, then tossed it aside with a grunt. Angela said nothing. "Stubborn little lady," Cole muttered. "What's your deal?" She met his gaze. "You are violating my rights." The stocky one, Mark Dalton, laughed. "You think quoting some liberal blog is going to help you?" Angela's voice was steady. "I'd like to make a phone call." Dalton looked amused. "Who are you calling? Oprah?" Angela didn't smile. "Number just an old friend at the White House." They snorted. "Sure you are." She reached slowly, painfully slow, and pulled a slim, matte black phone from inside her jacket. She dialed. One ring. A deep, measured voice answered. "General Anderson." "Sir," she said softly. "It's Angela Carter. I'm currently being detained, at gunpoint, by 2 officers on Route 25 near the Richmond County line. No probable cause, no warrant." Silence. Then, "Are you safe?" "I'm kneeling on the side of the road, sir." "I'll handle it." Angela ended the call. The officers stared. Dalton raised an eyebrow. "What the hell was that?" Angela looked directly at them. "The beginning of your reassignment." Seconds later, Dalton's radio crackled. "Unit 4, stand down. You are detaining a senior government official. Release her immediately. That's an order." Dalton froze. Angela stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and reached into her blazer again. This time, pulling out her government ID. Gold embossed. Steel lettering. Angela Carter, Senior Trade Advisor, Department of Commerce. Cole's smirk was gone. Dalton's hand trembled slightly. Neither said a word. And Angela? She simply stood there, taller than any of them could ever be. What do you think about how Angela handled this situation? What would you have done if you were in her position? Angela didn't speak as she stood tall in the glow of the patrol car's lights. Her blazer was dusted with dirt, her trousers creased at the knees where she'd knelt, but her composure was untouched. She held the ID card steady in her hand, letting the two officers get a good look at it. The gold seal of the Department of Commerce shimmered faintly under the red and blue flashing lights. Officer Dalton's face was pale, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Cole, the taller one, had stepped back a half pace as if the badge itself were radioactive. Angela saw it, how quickly their authority had dissolved into unease. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. That wasn't her style. "You had no reason to pull me over," she said calmly. "No probable cause, no warrant, and now, no cover." Dalton opened his mouth, then closed it again. His voice, when it came, was thin and unconvincing. "We didn't know who you were." Angela turned to him, her eyes steady. "And if I were just a black woman on her way home from work? What then? Still end up at gunpoint?" Cole shifted his weight, muttered something under his breath. Angela didn't ask him to repeat it. She took a step toward her car. "I'm retrieving my phone. Slowly. I'd like you to stay exactly where you are." The men said nothing. She opened her door, reached into the back seat, and retrieved her phone and laptop bag. Inside were confidential documents, proposals for reciprocal tariffs, internal assessments, and a copy of her personal notes from a strategy meeting with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. She placed the phone to her ear again. "Sir, it's Angela. They've stood down. I'm safe." General Anderson's voice was firm, clipped. "I've already spoken with Internal Affairs. Expect backup within minutes. Stay put." "Copy that." She ended the call. The night air hung heavy with tension, thick with things left unsaid. Far in the distance, a new set of headlights appeared, moving fast. Angela didn't need to guess. It was protocol now. The car pulled in smoothly behind the patrol unit, lights flashing but no siren. From it stepped two men in dark windbreakers with silver lettering, Internal Affairs. Behind them was a third figure, taller, broader, with a weathered face and silver hair beneath a black police cap. Chief Raymond Harper. His presence sucked the heat from the air. Dalton and Cole straightened like schoolboys caught smoking behind the gym. Harper's eyes scanned the scene quickly, Angela standing composed, the two officers rattled, the open car door, the disheveled paperwork. Then his gaze landed on the ID card still in Angela's hand. He stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Angela gave a single nod. "I'm unharmed, Chief, but we need to talk." Harper turned to Dalton and Cole. "Do you two know what you've done?" Dalton's voice cracked. "Chief, we didn't realize—" "It doesn't matter who she is," Harper cut in. "It matters what you did, and it's all on camera." One of the Internal Affairs agents stepped forward, tapping a device on his vest. "Body cam sync complete. We've got it all, from the first stop to the radio call." Cole rubbed his forehead like trying to erase the last half hour from his memory. Harper turned to Angela. "We'll take your statement, and I apologize, on behalf of this department and this city." Angela's lips pressed into a line. "An apology won't undo the damage. And this isn't the first time it's happened, just the first time you got caught with the wrong target." Harper nodded grimly. "We'll begin a full review, immediate suspension for both officers. We'll do this by the book." He gestured to the Internal Affairs agents, who flanked Dalton and Cole like prison guards. Neither officer resisted. They had no ground left to stand on. Angela waited until the officers were taken aside before she returned to her car. She sat behind the wheel, her fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel for a long moment. Her breath came out in one slow stream. Her phone buzzed with a message from Anderson. "Incident escalating to federal review. Secretary informed. Prepare to debrief Monday." She closed her eyes. All she had wanted was to get home. Just one night of quiet. and now she was a headline waiting to happen. Over the next 48 hours, the story swept across state lines. It started small, an anonymous post on a community forum, then a Facebook video of the flashing lights. But once local media got wind of Angela's identity, the narrative exploded. Senior government official detained at gunpoint in Georgia blared across news crawlers. CNN ran the footage. Fox demanded context. MSNBC ran a deep dive on racial profiling in the South. Angela didn't watch any of it. She spent Saturday morning in her kitchen, sipping coffee, answering emails from DC, and ignoring her vibrating phone. Offers came in. Morning shows, op-eds, interviews. She declined them all. She wasn't interested in being a symbol. She was interested in results. By Monday, she was back in Washington, seated in a conference room at the Department of Commerce, a steaming cup of Earl Grey in front of her, 3 thick folders to her right, and a conference line blinking on mute. Her colleagues entered with solemn nods, more cautious now, more aware. No one mentioned what had happened, but they all knew. She was scheduled to present revised tariff response models based on recent G7 deliberations. She clicked her laptop open, looked at the data, and for a second, just one, her eyes drifted toward the window. The Capitol dome shimmered in the distance. She exhaled, pressed unmute, and began her report. Her voice was as clear and steady as it had been on that dark road. Later that afternoon, she met with a small delegation from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. They wanted her story, not for the cameras, but for the record. Angela relayed it with precision, without embellishment. Every gesture, every word spoken by the officers, every moment of silence in between. "Do you want to press charges?" one of them asked. Angela paused. "Number. But I want something written into policy. I want field officers across this country to receive advanced training in bias identification and de-escalation. I want those body cams reviewed quarterly. I want this incident to matter, not just for me, but for the next black woman who gets pulled over and can't call a general." The man across from her leaned back in his chair, his fingers laced together. "That's reasonable," he said, "but it won't be easy." Angela smiled, the kind of smile forged through years of being told what couldn't be done. "If I wanted easy, I'd have chosen a different job." That evening, she walked home through the quiet streets of Capitol Hill. Cherry blossoms had begun to fall, their petals floating through the air like pieces of silk. The city was beautiful in spring, but she knew better than to be charmed by its surface. She knew its weight. She carried it with her. And though she walked alone, she walked taller than she ever had. Because now, the truth wasn't just in her voice. It was in the system, etched into reports, logged in video, confirmed by silence and by sound. And that meant something. Not everything, but something. By midweek, Angela's name was on every desk in the West Wing. The incident that began as a routine traffic stop had become a national firestorm. Cable networks debated the racial undertones of power and perception. Trade publications noted with irony that the same woman helping to negotiate global tariffs had nearly been shot on a highway for doing nothing but driving home. The president himself, amid heated discussions over retaliatory tariffs against Europe and China, was briefed on her status. When his chief of staff mentioned Angela Carter's name, he paused and said, "Isn't she the one heading reciprocal trade strategy?" That was all it took. The story, once confined to social media, now traveled through formal political channels, tangled up with national identity, race relations, and America's place in the global market. Back in Augusta, things were unraveling fast. Body cam footage had been released to the public. Angela's calm voice, the officer's aggressive tones, and the unmistakable sound of a gun cocking. These were not images that could be easily walked back. Citizens protested outside the police precinct. Former officers began coming forward about the culture of unchecked power inside the department. And Chief Harper, a man who'd spent 3 decades trying to balance enforcement with community trust, now found himself walking a tightrope with no net beneath him. Angela hadn't spoken publicly. She still answered calls from federal officials and civil rights leaders, but she kept the media at bay. She believed the work spoke louder than a podium ever could. Yet pressure kept mounting. The DOJ wanted her to participate in a national task force on police reform. The Commerce Secretary invited her to speak at a closed-door conference on racial bias in federal leadership. Universities reached out, offering honorary degrees. Even her alma mater in Atlanta asked her to give the commencement speech. But through it all, she kept returning to the same question. Would any of this have happened if she hadn't had the right name, the right title, the right number in her contact list? And what about those who didn't? One evening, just as dusk settled over the district, Angela stood in her modest Georgetown apartment, sipping tea as a local news anchor described a growing petition demanding that Officers Cole and Dalton not only be dismissed, but charged. She muted the TV. The petition had nearly 1 million signatures. People were angry. But anger alone didn't fix systems. It fueled them briefly, then left people burnt out and wondering what had changed. She thought about a conversation she'd had years ago with a trade partner from Canada. "You don't fight fire with fire," the woman had said. "You build a firebreak, something that stands strong between destruction and hope." Angela wasn't sure she believed in hope as easily as she used to, but she believed in structure. She believed in plans. And she believed that if a system could be weaponized, it could also be reformed. Piece by piece, clause by clause, training by training. The next morning, she met with Secretary Ramirez in a quiet, secured conference room near the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. He was cordial, thoughtful, and genuinely concerned. He'd seen the footage. "You didn't flinch," he said. "Not once." She gave a tired smile. "Flinching gets you shot." He asked what she wanted, truly wanted. She laid it out with the same precision she used when preparing trade responses. A federal mandate requiring all police departments to undergo quarterly external audits on traffic stops involving minorities. Nationwide use of de-escalation simulators in officer training. A federally funded task force that reported directly to the DOJ, staffed with professionals outside of law enforcement to monitor abuse of power. And most of all, real consequences. Not just suspensions, but disqualifications. Permanent records, visibility. "We track steel imports more aggressively than we track civil rights violations," she said quietly. Ramirez nodded. "It's time we change that." When she walked out of the building, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt ready. Word came 3 days later. The president had read her recommendations. A press conference was scheduled. She wasn't required to attend, but her name would be mentioned. That evening, Angela sat alone on a bench near the tidal basin, watching the cherry blossoms drift like memories over the water. Tourists passed by in groups, laughing, pointing at monuments, unaware of the woman in the dark blazer with the badge clipped to her belt. Her phone buzzed. General Anderson. "They want you to speak," he said without preamble. "Not as a victim, as an architect." She closed her eyes. "I'm not sure people are ready to hear it from me." "Angela," he said firmly, "you didn't survive this to go back to silence." She said nothing for a while, then nodded to herself. "All right, I'll do it. But it has to be real. No edits, no teleprompters." A week later, she stood at a podium in front of a small but packed auditorium at the Wilson Center, flanked by government officials, trade advisors, and law enforcement leaders. The air inside was still. Cameras whirred quietly at the back. She began not with outrage, not with policy, but with a story. Her story. Of that night on the highway. Of the fear she refused to show. Of the decision to kneel not in surrender, but to survive. She didn't accuse. She didn't attack. She simply told the truth, and let it land where it would. Then she pivoted, seamlessly, into recommendations. Evidence, data, policy, a roadmap. The room, quiet at first, leaned in. By the time she finished, the applause didn't erupt. It unfolded, slowly, rising like dawn. That night Angela walked to her car alone. A young black woman in her 20s, clearly waiting outside for her, approached hesitantly. "Ms. Carter," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you. My brother was stopped last year. No body cam. No call to make. We buried him 3 months later." Angela looked her in the eye, feeling the gravity of every name that never made it to the news. "You shouldn't have had to." She reached out, took the young woman's hand, and held it. "You stay loud, all right? Loud and brave." The sun was setting when Angela drove down Constitution Avenue, the orange sky casting long shadows across the city she served. The scars of that night in Georgia hadn't disappeared. They never would. But something else had emerged in their place. A new blueprint. One not drafted in anger, but in clarity, in resilience, in the unshakable belief that justice isn't about power. It's about principle, and sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stand your ground, make the call, and never look away.